It was kind of funny when I started writing my spiritual autobiography so that I could submit it for religious life. It's something that for a job you would submit your resume and your application. Well, when you're looking at entering religious life, you do a spiritual autobiography, and they have you write over many different areas of your life and different situations and people and just your entire faith life as well as just your general life and how those two coincide. And it was really funny because as I was writing this, it was just like my vocation, my call to religious life to become a sister was so obvious. And yet, throughout my life, when you're in the moment, you're like, well, God, are you calling me this way? Or you're calling me that way? I feel this way when I'm in the church, but then I went out on this date and I feel this way. And you really don't know which way. Where is God calling you? Well, first and foremost, that is why having a spiritual director is really, really important. You know, it was only when I knew God was calling me to religious life that I really went to get a spiritual director. Had I had a spiritual director before, that spiritual director would have been able to be able to see the hindsight like I was able to see the hindsight in my autobiography. Just the spiritual director would be helping guide you during that time, so they might help catch that kind of earlier. So it's really important that as we grow in our Christian faith, as a general rule, that we have a spiritual director, a spiritual companion, somebody that can help us on our path. They can point out things that we might not necessarily see about ourselves, or they can see patterns that kind of fit into who and what we are. The simple fact that during my discernment time, God literally put this man in my life that he met every single one of those things that I was wanting in a husband. And when he put this man in my life, I was trying to discern my vocation. Are you calling me to married life? Are you calling me to religious life? Are you calling me to committed single life? And it was actually one day when we were at Mass together and the guy was going in front of me. And he goes up to receive communion. And I remember I'm behind him. And all of a sudden my mind goes to, oh, wow, isn't he so reverent? And then immediately, this is all happening in a split second. You're lying. I haven't gone up yet to receive communion. And I think to myself, why am I focusing on him? I'm about to receive you, Lord. You are about to enter my body. I should be fully focused on you. And he's a distraction. And right then and there, I knew I had to, part ways a little bit with the guy. But I didn't really know that meant that God was calling me completely to be his bride. Had I had a spiritual director and had I said this at the time to him, the spiritual director would say, so Kim, you've got this literally Saint Joseph type of man in your life, and yet you feel more called, you're more drawn to God. You feel that this Saint Joseph kind of man in your life is a distraction. What do you think that's telling you? If the guy that meets all your criteria, you feel is a distraction that's keeping you from God in some ways. But I didn't have the spiritual director, and so I, had a little torment back and forth. God, are you calling me? Are you not calling me? But God, in his true gentleman way, left the decision to me, but he made the invitation. And I gave God the silence so he could make the invitation. It's kind of like, not checking your phone messages. There could be 100 messages there from God, but if you don't ever go to listen to them, you're not going to know what those phone messages are. And we have to give silence so we hear God. And so it was really beautiful for me. And, a lot of times when we talk about discernment, there's a lot of similarities in discernment stories, but a lot of times they're very individual and very unique to the person. God speaks to you one way, but he might speak to me another. And so tonight, I'm going to share with you guys my vocation story. And you're going to kind of see the whole process. You're going to see some areas that I will challenge you because there were areas that challenged me. You'll also probably have some areas that you will laugh at me. And don't worry, I laugh at myself in some of the situations. But it's really about where is God calling each and every single one of us. And so that really begins for me when I opened my entire life up to God. And it was no longer keeping, Jesus in these compartments, Jesus in the compartment that I do good tithing, Jesus in the compartment that I volunteer at the church. But this part of my life is off limits. And when I say this part of my life is off limits, At the point, I was very content. I was, in my upper 20s, and I had had a very successful career. I had done well financially. By most people's accounts, they would consider me a pretty decent person. I volunteered a lot, and I had a lot of wonderful relationships with my colleagues, and I had done a really meaningful career helping students, achieve a better life. But something was missing. And for me, that was really that God component. And even though I was doing a lot of things at the church, there still was something missing. And it was a challenge that my grandmother gave me. And that challenge really drastically changed my life. Because had my grandmother not had this conversation with me one day, it could have been a long time before I figured out where God was calling me. And so we're going to talk a little bit about my vocation and where that all begins. It's actually on a visit. I was visiting my grandmother in the nursing home. She was 98 years old. And I was hanging out with her, talking with her, telling her what was going on in my life. And I was going to give a talk that evening to a women's group. And so I asked her if she wanted me to give the talk. After I finished the talk, my grandmother said something that I never expected my grandmother to say. And it caught me so off guard.